The asphalt at the Red Mesa gas station was soft enough to take a fingerprint. 108 degrees on the bank sign across the highway, and the air above the pumps shimmered like something alive, something hungry. The sun had been bleaching this stretch of Arizona for so many million years that the rocks themselves looked tired. Out past the chain-link fence, the desert went on forever, broken only by the slow, indifferent turn of a single buzzard high above. The little girl's shoes made no sound on the oil-stained ground. She was 7 years old. Her name was Junie Mae Marsh, and her dress had been a cheerful yellow, once the color of new sunflowers, the color of birthday cake frosting. Now it was the color of dust and old fear. Her hair, the same pale blonde as her mother's, hung in two thin braids that had come halfway undone in the long, hot drive. Her eyes were too big for her face. Children's eyes were not supposed to look the way hers looked. They were not supposed to know what hers knew. She slipped out of the back seat of the beat-up sedan while the man was inside the gas station. She had practiced it in her head for 200 miles. The door handle was sticky with the heat in the years. She turned it with a slow, careful pressure, the way you turn a doorknob when you don't want a monster to hear. The latch gave with a tiny click that sounded to her like a gunshot. But the monster didn't hear. The monster was inside buying a bottle of water and a pack of mints, smiling at the teenage clerk with his straight white teeth. Junie Mae looked back over her shoulder just once at the woman in the passenger seat. Her mother. Della Marsh, 32 years old, worn thin as a winter shadow. The bruise on her arm was hidden under a long sleeve she shouldn't have been wearing in this heat, but the heat was the least of what hurt. She met her daughter's eyes through the dusty glass. She gave a single nod. So small, so tired. Go. It was the bravest thing Della Marsh had done in 14 months. Junie Mae stepped out into the parking lot, and the heat hit her like an open oven. The dress stuck to her skin. The sun pressed down on the top of her head like a hand. She had no plan. She had no idea where to run. There was nothing out here but the highway and the desert and the long, long emptiness. Then she heard it. A low rumble. Not the highway, not the wind. Something deeper. Something that came up through the soles of her shoes and into her chest like a second heartbeat. She turned toward the sound. Over by the air pump, 5 motorcycles were parked in a perfect line. 5 big chrome and black machines gleaming under the white sun, their engines ticking softly as they cooled. And standing around them, 5 men. They looked to Junie Mae's small eyes like they had been carved out of the desert itself. Leather and denim and ink, beards and scars and silver in their hair. Arms thick as fence posts hung with tattoos that told stories no 7-year-old should ever read. Cut-off vests with patches sewn on the back. A skull with angel wings. Words she couldn't make out. A grown-up would have looked at those 5 men and crossed the street. A grown-up would have locked the car doors. A grown-up would have called the police. But Junie Mae Marsh was not a grown-up. She was a 7-year-old girl, and she had spent 14 months learning that the most dangerous monster she had ever met wore a clean suit and shined his shoes every morning. She had learned that the people who looked kind were the ones who hurt you, and the people who said the right words were the ones who broke your mother in the dark. So when she looked at those 5 hard men by the air pump, she did not see what a grown-up would have seen. She saw something else. She saw the one in the middle, older than the others. His hair was more silver than black, pulled back tight against his skull and gathered into a tail at the base of his neck. His beard was short and neat. His face was a map of long roads and old fights, the skin tanned to leather by 40 years of sun. He was not the biggest of them. He was something else. He was the still point, the anchor. When he moved, even just to wipe his hands on a red rag, the other 4 orbited him without seeming to notice they were doing it. And his eyes were the strangest part. They should have been hard. They were hard, but underneath the hardness there was something gray and quiet and old. Something that had seen too much and refused to look away. Junie Mae did not know any of these things in words. She only knew them the way a small animal knows where the warmth is. The way a child knows without being told which lap is safe. She tightened her hand around the thing she had been carrying in her pocket for 6 weeks. A folded, sweat-damp piece of paper money. A $20 bill worn soft as cloth from being touched and untouched 1,000 times. And then she ran. She ran across the hot blacktop in her cheap dress and her cheap shoes, her braids bouncing, her face streaked with sweat, and something that might have been the beginning of tears or the end of them. She ran past the family in the minivan, the mother with her hand frozen halfway to her mouth, holding a French fry, the father turning his head in slow, dawning confusion. She ran past the pumps and the ice machine and the cardboard sign that said night crawlers $4. She ran toward the man with the silver ponytail. His name, though she did not know it yet, was Wyatt Brennan. The men in his club called him Stone. He was 58 years old. He had buried more brothers than he could count on both hands. He had not cried since 1986. Stone was checking the rear tire of his bike when he saw the movement out of the corner of his eye. A flash of yellow. The wrong kind of motion in a parking lot full of slow, heat-stunned people. He straightened up slow as old machinery, his knees giving their usual small protest. He turned his head, and he saw her. The little girl in the dirty yellow dress, running straight at him, her face wet, her hand clenched around something white. Behind her, 60 feet back, the door of the gas station was just beginning to open. Stone did not move. He did not reach for anything. He did not call out. He stood very still by his bike, and he let her come. The other four turned one after the other like they had been pulled by a single string. Tank 6'5" and built like the back of a barn, his arms folded across a chest the size of a kitchen table. Doc the medic, grayer and leaner, his hands going still on the rag he had been wiping them with. Forge the cook, his one good eye narrowing under the brim of a sweat-stained cap. And Ghost, the quiet one, the one who never seemed to be looking at anything and yet missed nothing, his hand already very casually sliding toward the phone clipped to his belt. None of them moved to stop her. None of them moved to help her. They stood, the four of them, in a loose half-circle around their leader, and they waited. Because Stone had not given the signal. Junie May stopped 2 feet in front of him. Her chest was going up and down like a small bellows. The top of her head came up to about his belt buckle. She had to tilt her chin all the way back to look up at him, and when she did, he saw something move behind his ribs that had not moved in a very long time. He saw a face he had not seen in 40 years. Not this child's face. He had never seen this child before in his life. But the shape of the fear, the way the eyes were set too wide, the way the small mouth was held tight against the trembling. He had seen all of that before a long time ago, in another desert town in another century, on the face of a 9-year-old girl named Emily Brennan. Stone breathed in, slow, through his nose, the way the Army had taught him half a lifetime ago to keep his hands from shaking before a shot. Then he did something the men around him would talk about for years afterward. He knelt, a man his size, his age, with his knees lowering himself down onto one battered work boot, and then the other until he was level with the 7-year-old in the yellow dress. His leather creaked, his joints made small, honest complaints. He did not reach for her. He did not smile. Smiles in his experience were what bad men used. He just looked at her level and steady, and he waited. Junie May held out her hand. The folded $20 bill was damp and warm. The corners were soft and frayed. She held it out to him with both hands the way a child holds a found bird. Her voice, when it came, was so small it almost was not there at all, almost lost under the hum of the cicadas and the distant tick of cooling chrome. "You were the man," she whispered, "who gave my mom your last $20. The world stopped. The buzzard above this desert paused mid-glide. The cicadas held their breath. The teenage clerk inside the station froze with his hand on a bag of beef jerky. The mother in the minivan still had not lowered her French fry. Stone looked at the soft folded bill in the little girl's hands, and in the back of his head a door he had not opened in 6 weeks opened up. A diner, a truck stop diner in Flagstaff. A Tuesday morning, early, the light still thin and pink. He had been the only customer except for a young woman in a booth by the window. She had a child with her, a little girl in pajamas with a stuffed bear under one arm, half asleep against her mother's shoulder. The woman had been counting change out of a coin purse onto the table. Quarters, dimes, pennies, trying to make enough for 2 pancakes and a glass of milk. The waitress, a tired woman with a cross around her neck, had been pretending not to watch. Stone had finished his coffee. He had stood up to pay. He had put a $20 bill on the woman's table without looking at her, without saying a word, and walked out into the parking lot. He had not done it to be kind. He had done it because he had a sister once, a long time ago, who used to count pennies at a kitchen table just like that, and he had not been able to help her then. He had walked out and gotten on his bike and ridden 300 miles south, and he had never once expected to see that woman again. He had not even looked at her face long enough to remember it. But the child had remembered him. The child had remembered him. Stone lifted his eyes slow as the desert turning and looked past Junie May's small shoulder. There in the passenger seat of the sedan was the young mother from the Flagstaff diner, 6 weeks older, 20 pounds thinner. Her eyes hollowed out into dark wells. She was looking back at him through the windshield, and the look on her face was something he did not have a word for. It was hope and shame and apology and prayer all at the same time. A single tear had cut a clean track through the dust on her cheek. She mouthed something he could not hear. Two words. He thought maybe they were thank you. He thought maybe they were help us. Maybe they were both. Stone looked back down at the little girl. "What is your name, sweetheart?" he said. His voice was low and rough as gravel under a slow tire, but it had been gentled somehow in the back of his throat. The other four men exchanged a look. They did not often hear that voice. "Junie May," she whispered. "Junie May," he repeated. He let the name sit in his mouth a moment, the way a man tastes something he wants to remember. "That is a fine name." She nodded very small. "Junie May," he said. "You keep that $20. That money was for your mama. I gave it to her. It is hers and yours, you understand. It is not mine to take back." Her small hand closed around the bill again. "Now I'm going to ask you a question," Stone said, "and I want you to tell me the truth. I am not going to be angry. I am not going to be anything but here. You understand?" She nodded again. He breathed in, he breathed out. "Is the man your mama is with," he said, "hurting you and her?" The bell over the gas station door jingled. Out into the white afternoon stepped a man in a charcoal gray suit, 6 feet tall, late 40s, pressed shirt, no tie, the collar open just enough to suggest a person who had loosened a tie that morning in a more important place. His hair was the color of polished walnut swept back, not a strand out of place. His shoes were oxblood leather, and they shone even out here, even in this dust. He carried a bottle of water in one hand and a small white paper sack in the other, and he was smiling. The smile of a man on his way to a board meeting. The smile of a man who has never in his life been told no. His name was Vincent Pierce, and from a distance you would have thought he was the safest person at the Red Mesa gas station. His eyes found the empty back seat of the sedan first. Then his face went still in a way that on another man might have looked like fear. On him it looked like the moment a hawk locks on. He scanned the lot. Family in the minivan. Teenager behind the counter through the window. Empty pumps. And then over by the air pump, the bikers. And there, kneeling on the ground in front of the biggest one, in the very middle of all those men, his lost little ward. His face rearranged itself smooth as oil on water back into the smile. "Junie May," Pierce called, his voice carrying easy and warm across the lot. "There you are, sweetheart. We were worried sick. Come on now, honey. Come on back to the car. Mama is waiting." Junie May did not move. She did not move toward him. She did not move away from him. She did, however, do one small thing. She took the tiniest possible step. Not back, not forward, sideways, behind Stone's knee. She pressed the side of her face against the worn denim of his work jeans, and she stayed there. Stone felt it. The lightest weight in the world. A small head against his leg. A pair of thin arms going around the back of his calf as if it were the trunk of a tree in a flood. He did not look down at her. He kept his eyes, those quiet gray eyes, on Vincent Pierce. But he answered her question all the same. His hand came up, very slowly, and he laid it gently as a blessing on the top of her dusty blonde head. It was the smallest gesture, a man putting a hand on a child's head. In the parking lot of the Red Mesa gas station in 108-degree heat at 2:47 on a Tuesday afternoon, that small gesture drew a line in the world. On one side of the line stood Vincent Pierce in his $1,000 shoes. On the other side stood 5 men in old leather, one tired woman in a sedan, and a 7-year-old girl in a yellow dress. Pierce did not know it yet, but he had just walked up to the wrong side of that line. He kept the smile on. He started to walk toward them. Easy, confident. The walk of a man who has never once doubted that the world was on his side. "Gentlemen," Pierce said, and there was just the smallest emphasis on the word, the smallest curl of distaste under the courtesy. "I appreciate you keeping an eye on her. She has been having a hard time. Her mother has been having a hard time. We have had a rough year. I am a family friend. Legal counsel, actually. We are on our way to a safe place where she and her mama can get the help they need." He held out his hand toward Junie May. The hand did not tremble. The hand was perfect. Manicured nails, a heavy gold class ring on one finger, a wristwatch that probably cost more than the bikes behind him. "Come on, honey," he said. "Let us go." Junie May pressed her face harder into Stone's leg. Stone did not move his hand from her head. "Sir," Stone said, and his voice was as flat and even as the desert horizon. "The little girl asked me a question. I have not finished answering it. You want to give me a minute we can all talk?" The smile on Pierce's face did not change, but behind it something rearranged. A muscle moved along his jaw. "I do not think you understand," Pierce said, and now there was a small note of strain in his voice, the way a violin string sounds just before it goes. "I have legal custody of the child's welfare during this transitional period. The mother is not well. The mother is on medication. The mother has a history of episodes. I am sure you have no interest in interfering with a confidential family matter." "You are right about that," Stone said. "I got no interest in family matters." He paused, just long enough for the relief to start to show in the corners of Pierce's mouth. "I do," Stone said, "have an interest in the little girl." The relief stopped. Behind Pierce, somewhere off to his left and back, Tank had not moved. Tank had also not been still. He had, in the quiet way of very large men, drifted about 2 feet to the side and 3 feet closer so that he was now standing in the only clear path from Pierce back to the sedan. He had not crossed his arms anymore. He had let them hang loose at his sides. His face was as placid and pleasant as the face of a granite cliff. Doc had drifted in the other direction. Forge was suddenly leaning against the front fender of the sedan, blocking the driver's door. None of them looked at any of the others. They did not need to. They had been doing this dance for 28 years. And Ghost, against the back of his own bike, was tapping his phone. He was a wiry man, Ghost, late 40s, sharp face, sharp eyes, hair clipped short and graying at the temples. The patch over his heart said Ghost in white thread, but the name on his California driver's license read Caleb Ridgway, and before he was Caleb Ridgway of the Sons of Salvation, he had been Sergeant First Class Caleb Ridgway of the 75th Ranger Regiment. 12 years in intelligence and reconnaissance. The kind of man who could find a needle in a haystack while the haystack was on fire. He was finding a needle now. His thumbs moved over the screen in small and troubled motions. He did not appear to be paying attention to the conversation. He was paying total attention to the conversation. Pierce noticed. Pierce was a man who noticed things. His eyes flicked to the phone for half a second, and that half a second was all Stone needed. "Mr. Pierce," Stone said. Pierce's head came up sharp. He had not given his name. "Mr. Pierce," Stone said again, "we are going to do this real simple. The little girl and her mama are going to sit down right here in the shade, and I am going to buy them a cold drink, and we are all going to wait for the sheriff to come down this road. He is already on his way. Somebody inside the station made the call about 3 minutes ago." He did not look toward the inside of the station, where the teenage clerk had in fact done exactly that. "While we wait, my friend here is going to look you up. Just a name, just a public record, same as anybody else could do on their phone." He paused. "If everything checks out, sir, you will be on your way before sundown. You will have my apologies and a cold Coke. But the little girl asked for help, Mr. Pierce. And in my line of work, when a child asks for help, you stop everything else and you listen. That is the rule. That is the only rule." He waited. Pierce stood very still in the white sun. Behind him, the desert sang its slow, dry song. "Your line of work," Pierce said softly. The smile was gone now. Something else had taken its place. Something colder and older. "And what line of work would that be exactly? You do not look like a man with a line of work. You look like a man with a bike and a long string of bad decisions." "Mr. Forge said, from the fender of the sedan in the easy voice of a man commenting on the weather, you do not want to start picking fights you cannot finish. It is too hot." Pierce ignored him. He took one step closer to Stone and to the little girl pressed against Stone's leg. His voice dropped soft and intimate and meant for Stone alone. "You are going to give me that child," he said, "and you are going to get on your bike and you are going to ride away. Because if you do not, I am going to make a single phone call. And by sundown, there will be a social services van and 3 squad cars in this parking lot, and a judge in Phoenix who owes me a favor is going to sign a piece of paper, and that little girl is going to spend the night in a county facility while her mother is held for psychiatric evaluation. Do you understand me, old man? I do not lose. I do not ever lose. Now stand up and step away from her." Stone looked up at him from one knee. For a long second, he did not say anything at all. Then he turned his head just a little and he spoke to Ghost without taking his eyes off Pierce. Anything yet, brother? Working on it, Ghost said pleasantly. Take your time, Stone said. Pierce's nostrils flared. A tiny, perfect betrayal. Listen to me, you overgrown ape, he hissed low and venomous, all the silk gone now, all the manicure stripped away to show what was underneath. You have no idea who you are dealing with. I will end you. I will end your little club. I will have every one of you in handcuffs before this day is over. Stone breathed in through his nose. Slow. He breathed out. He had heard this kind of voice before. He had heard it on a hot August afternoon in 1985 in the kitchen of a small house in Tucson, coming out of the mouth of a man in a clean suit who smiled at his mother and called her darling, and told a 15-year-old boy to mind his own business and go ride his bike. He had heard it, and he had ridden his bike. He had ridden his bike for 2 hours that day because his mother had asked him to, because his mother had said the man was helping them, because his mother had needed to believe that. His sister Emily had been alone in the house with that voice for those 2 hours. Stone had been hearing that voice in his sleep for 40 years. He looked up at Vincent Pierce, and behind his quiet gray eyes, the thing that had been sleeping for a very long time rolled over and opened one eye. Mr. Pierce, he said softly, you ought to stop talking now, while you still have the option. Got it, Ghost said, just that. 2 words pleasant as good morning. Stone did not turn his head. Read it to me, brother. Ghost looked up from his phone. His face was without any particular expression at all. Vincent Allen Pierce, he said, 46 years old, currently of no fixed address. Last known residence, Henderson, Nevada. Not a licensed attorney in any state. Holds an expired Series 65 investment advisor registration, surrendered in 2024 under investigation. Restraining order filed against him in Washoe County in 2024 by one Eleanor Vance complaint withdrawn 3 weeks later, under what court records describe as a confidential settlement. 2 civil suits in the last 6 years from former clients, both settled with non-disclosure agreements. Subject of 3 open complaints at the Arizona Department of Financial Institutions for predatory practices targeting recently widowed women. Current vehicle registered to a limited liability company that was administratively dissolved 6 months ago. He paused. He is a ghost boss. He is not what he says he is. He is not anything he says he is. The silence in the parking lot was a different kind of silence now. In the minivan, the mother had slowly lowered the French fry. In the sedan, Delamarche had opened the passenger door and stepped out onto the blacktop on legs that did not quite hold her up. Inside the station, the teenage clerk had raised his cell phone to the glass, recording his thumb shaking slightly. Pierce had gone the color of old paper. That is slander, he said, but the silk in his voice had cracked all the way through now, and what came out underneath was thinner and meaner. That is confidential. That is hacked information. You cannot— It is public record, Ghost said. Every word, any citizen with a phone in 10 minutes. Pierce's eyes darted to the sedan, to Della on her feet now, one trembling hand on the open door, to Junie Mae still pressed against Stone's leg, to Tank blocking his path back, to Forge blocking the car, to the road far away. His mind worked. Stone could see it work. He had seen it before, this look on the faces of men in a corner. There was no good way out, but men like Pierce did not believe that. Men like Pierce always believed there was a way out if they were just willing to do the next ugly thing. The next ugly thing, Stone realized half a second before it happened, was the little girl. Pierce lunged, not at Stone, not at Tank, not at Forge or Doc or Ghost, at the 7-year-old. He came forward fast, his polished shoes squeaking on the hot blacktop, his manicured hand reaching for the thin arm of the child in the yellow dress, and what was in his eyes in that moment was not the smile of the family attorney. It was the face under the smile. It was what Vincent Pierce really looked like when no one important was watching. Della screamed. Stone moved. A man his size, his age, should not have been able to move that fast. He had been kneeling. He had been still. The little girl was tucked behind his knee, but he was already moving before Pierce's hand was halfway out, before the scream from the sedan was halfway formed. He came up off the ground like something old rising out of deep water. He did not strike. He did not punch. He did not need to. His left hand closed around Vincent Pierce's outstretched wrist. His right hand came up and settled broad and heavy as a paving stone on Vincent Pierce's collarbone. That was all. Pierce's whole body simply stopped. as if he had run full speed into a wall that he had not seen because the wall had not been there a second before. His shoes squeaked. His head snapped slightly forward. The bottle of water dropped from his hand and hit the asphalt with a soft, dull sound and rolled in a slow circle. Stone leaned down. Just a little. Just enough. Bad choice, he said very quietly, only for Pierce. Very bad choice. Pierce tried to pull his wrist free. It did not move. He tried to step back. The hand on his collarbone did not let him. He looked into Stone's eyes from 6 inches away, and whatever he saw there made the last of the color leave his face. Far off down the highway, very faint, a siren began to climb the still air. A long way out, a county sheriff's cruiser had turned off the interstate and was coming up the access road, kicking a long, pale rooster tail of dust behind it. The teenage clerk had done his job. Pierce heard the siren. His eyes flicked toward it, and for one bright second, the old confidence flared back up in his face. The law. The law was a thing he understood. The law was a thing he knew how to use. He could not have been more wrong about that, but he did not know it yet. Stone heard the siren too. He did not look. He kept his eyes on Pierce. Behind him, Delamarche had taken 2 stumbling steps away from the sedan and stopped, both hands pressed over her mouth, staring at the man who had owned her life for 14 months, as if she were seeing him properly for the very first time. Junie May had come out from behind Stone's leg. Just a little. She was holding the folded $20 bill in one small fist. She was looking up at Stone, not at Pierce, at Stone. "Mister," she said. Stone did not take his eyes off Pierce, but he answered, "Yes, sweetheart." "Are you an angel?" Tank's mouth twitched just at the corner. Doc looked down at his boots and pretended to find something interesting there. Forge's good eye got suddenly bright and wet. Stone breathed out. For a long, long second, the only sounds were the cicadas and the rising whine of the sheriff's siren and the slow tick of metal cooling in the sun. "No, honey," he said at last. His voice was so soft you could barely hear it. "No, I am not even close." He paused. "But we do what we can to chase the monsters off." The sheriff's cruiser was a quarter-mile out now. The dust behind it climbed up into the white sky. Vincent Pierce was still standing in the iron circle of Stone's hands, breathing hard. His good clothes already starting to wilt with sweat. His world coming apart faster than he could put it back together. He was not a man who had ever spent a night in a cell. He had always been on the other end of that phone call. He had always been the voice that ended the night, not the voice that started it. But Stone, looking down into his face from those 6 quiet inches, saw something else too. Something Pierce had let slip when he lunged for the child. Something underneath the manicured surface, deeper than the lies on the surface that Stone had been hunting for one shape or another of his entire grown life. Pierce had not lunged like an amateur. He had not lunged like a man making a desperate first mistake. He had lunged like a man who had grabbed at scared little girls before and gotten away with it. And he had lunged with a class ring on his right hand, a heavy gold ring, the kind a certain kind of man wears all his life. Stone had seen the ring flash in the sun as the hand came up. He had not had time to read it. He had been busy. But somewhere in the back of Stone's mind, behind the door he had opened 40 seconds and 40 years ago, something small and cold began to wake up. Something that was not done yet. Something that would in the coming days change the shape of all their lives. For now, though, the siren was loud and the cruiser was pulling in, and a tired-looking county sheriff in a sun-faded uniform was getting out with his hand resting on his holster and his eyes moving fast over the scene. For now, Stone kept his grip on Vincent Pierce, easy and unhurried, like a man holding a dog by the collar. And the 7-year-old girl in the yellow dress, with the soft folded $20 bill in her small fist, stood very close to his leg in the white afternoon sun, and for the first time in 14 months, she was not afraid. Sheriff Bowman Caldwell, known to everyone in the town of Cottonwood, and most of the county outside it, as Sheriff Bow was 61 years old and 3 years from his pension. He had a soft paunch over his belt and a sun-leathered face and a pair of eyes that had spent a long working life sorting out lies from the truth in roadside arguments and trailer park kitchens. He stepped out of the cruiser with his hand on his sidearm because that was what training said to do, and his training said the threat in this parking lot was the 5 men in leather. His training was wrong. His training had not, however, been wrong often enough in 35 years for him to ignore it. "All right," he said loud and steady in the voice that had ended 100 bar fights and 1,000 domestic calls. "Everybody hold what you are doing. You, big fellow, take your hands off the gentleman." Stone did not move for one full beat. He looked at Pierce. Then he opened his hands slowly, finger by finger, and stepped back one pace. Pierce staggered. He caught himself. He rubbed his wrist. The smile came back onto his face like a thing being pulled up out of his pocket and clipped into place. "Sheriff," Pierce said, his voice already finding its silk again. "Thank God, these men assaulted me. They are attempting to abduct this woman and child. I am her legal counsel. I have documentation in the car. I want to press charges. Assault, kidnapping, menacing, all of them." Sheriff Bowe's eyes moved. To Pierce, to Stone, to the woman with the bruise on her arm now visible because she had pushed the long sleeve up without noticing, to the little girl in the yellow dress who was holding the leader of the bikers by two fingers of his right hand. The little girl was looking up at the sheriff with the same big tired eyes she had looked at everyone with that day. And she was not letting go of Stone's fingers. Sheriff Bowe had been a cop a long time. He took his hand off his sidearm. "All right," he said more slowly. "All right, everybody is going to stand still and somebody is going to tell me real calm what is happening here, and we are going to start." And his eyes settled not on Pierce, not on Stone, but on Della Marsh, with the lady. Della opened her mouth. Out in the desert, the buzzard had finally given up its slow circle and drifted away on a hot updraft looking for fresher dead. And the long afternoon at the Red Mesa gas station, the afternoon that would 1 year later be told and retold in living rooms and barbershops and church basements all across 2 counties, as the day the Sons of Salvation became something more than a name, was only just beginning. Della Marsh did not know how to begin. She stood there on the hot blacktop with the sun pressing down on the part in her hair and the bruise on her arm out in the open for the first time in 14 months, and she opened her mouth, and what came out was not a sentence. It was a small broken sound, like something inside her chest had finally given way under the weight it had been carrying. Sheriff Bowe took one step closer to her. Not threatening, the way you step toward a deer that has come down out of the woods into your yard. "It is all right, ma'am," he said. "Take your time. You are safe. Nothing is going to happen to you here." "He killed my husband." The words came out of her so fast and so quiet that the sheriff almost missed them. He did not miss them. He had been a cop too long to miss a thing like that. His head came up just a fraction. His eyes did not leave Della's face, but he was suddenly completely listening. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "would you say that again for me, please?" Della's hands had come up around herself, thin arms wrapped around her own ribs as if she were holding herself together. The bruise looked uglier in the sun than it had in the shadow of the car. "He killed Thaddeus," she said. "He killed my Tad. He stood next to the casket, and he held my hand, and he said he would make sure we were taken care of. He killed him, and then he came for us." Vincent Pierce laughed. It was a short, sharp, theatrical laugh, the kind a man uses to wave away a child's bad dream. Sheriff Pierce said, "You are listening to a woman in the middle of a psychiatric episode. Her husband died in a documented workplace accident. There was a full investigation. The case file is closed. She has been on antidepressants for over a year. She has missed 2 of her last 3 appointments with her psychiatrist. I am her court-appointed financial conservator, and I am trying very patiently to get her into care. This is exactly the kind of scene I have been trying to prevent." He had pulled himself fully back together now. The suit was wrinkled, but the voice was smooth as a banker's pen. Sheriff Bowe did not look at him. Sheriff Bowe was looking at Stone. "Mister," he said. "Brennan," Stone said. "Wyatt Brennan. The men call me Stone. Mr. Brennan, your friend over there with the phone. He had something to tell me a minute ago." "Yes, sir," Stone said. "He did." Ghost stepped forward, polite as a man at a town meeting. He held out the phone. His other hand he kept loose and visible at his side. He was a man who had been on the other side of a lot of traffic stops in his time, and he knew how to make a uniformed officer comfortable. Sheriff Ghost said, "My name is Caleb Ridgway. I served 12 years with the 75th Ranger Regiment Intelligence Section. I am happy to give you my service number, and you can call any field office and verify. What you are looking at on this screen is publicly available information. Court records, Bar Association records, DMV, Department of Financial Institutions complaints. I did not access anything that is not accessible to any private citizen with a library card." Sheriff Bowe took the phone. He held it at the distance of a man who needed reading glasses he had forgotten to put on. His eyes moved down the screen. They moved back up. They moved down again. When he looked up, he was no longer looking at the bikers like the bikers were the problem. He turned his head slow and he looked at Vincent Pierce. "Mr. Pierce," he said, "you told me about 90 seconds ago that you are this lady's attorney." Pierce began. "You also told me you have court paperwork in the car appointing you as her financial conservator." "I have documentation. What I have in front of me here," Sheriff Bowe said, "is a printout from the State Bar of Arizona and the State Bar of Nevada that says you are not now and never have been a licensed attorney in either state. What I have here from the Nevada Department of Business is a Series 65 surrender from a state investigation into your handling of client funds. What I have is a restraining order out of Washoe County 2 years ago. What I have is the dissolution of the LLC your vehicle is registered to." He looked up. "Would you like to revise your statement, sir?" The color in Pierce's face changed for the second time in 5 minutes. Tank behind him did not move. Did not have to. The pleasant blank granite cliff face was still in place. But you could feel him there. The way you feel a thunderhead at the edge of a town. "That is all easily explained," Pierce said. "I have an associate who handles the actual filings. The conservatorship was issued out of California, different jurisdiction. I would be happy to step over to my vehicle and retrieve the paperwork." "Forge," Stone said without looking back. "Stay right where you are, brother." "Already am, boss," Forge said cheerfully from his lean against the front fender of the sedan. Pierce's jaw tightened. "Sheriff," he said, his voice climbing a half note, "are you actually going to let these men prevent me from accessing my own vehicle? Are you going to take the word of a gang of motorcycle outlaws over a member of the legal community? Do you have any idea who I work with? Do you have any idea what kind of phone calls I can make? You are a county sheriff, sir. You are 3 years from a pension. Do not make this mistake." That was the wrong sentence. Sheriff Bowe had been undecided up to about the middle of that sentence. He had been doing what good country sheriffs do when handed a mess on a hot afternoon, which is moving slowly and saying as little as possible while he made up his mind. The Nevada paperwork had been moving him in one direction. The look on Delamarche's face had been moving him in the same direction. The 7-year-old who had not let go of Stone's 2 fingers had been moving him in the same direction. But it was the phrase 3 years from a pension that finished it. Sheriff Beau Caldwell was in fact 3 years from a pension. He had been counting the months. His wife had picked out a fishing cabin up in the White Mountains, and they had been making payments on it for a decade. He had every reason in the world to stay quiet, to hand this off to call a state trooper in a CPS unit and let somebody above his pay grade sort it out before it became a thing. But Sheriff Beau had also been a deputy in 1986 in another county, and he had been the deputy who responded to a call about a little girl who had not come home. He had been the deputy who found her. He had spent 38 years not talking about that day. And when Vincent Pierce in his $1,000 suit looked at him and said, "Do not make this mistake," what Sheriff Beau heard very clearly in another voice from a long time ago was an entirely different sentence. He heard a man telling him to look the other way. Sheriff Beau handed the phone back to Ghost without taking his eyes off Pierce. "Mr. Pierce," he said quietly, "would you please place your hands on the hood of my vehicle, sir? You cannot be serious." "I am completely serious, sir. We are going to take a drive into town, and we are going to clear up some things. If everything is as you say it is, you will be back on the road before supper. If it is not, well." He let that one trail off. "Hands on the hood, please. We can do it the easy way or the hard way, but we are going to do it." Pierce's eyes flicked the way they had been flicking all afternoon, looking for a way out. There was no way out. For the first time in his adult life, Vincent Pierce understood that there was no way out. The smile dropped. What was underneath it was the face Stone had seen for half a second when Pierce lunged at the little girl. A face built out of old contempt, like a person who has spent his entire life looking at other people the way a butcher looks at meat. He turned slowly and walked the 4 steps to the sheriff's cruiser, and he put his manicured hands flat on the hot hood, and the hood was so hot he made a small, sharp sound through his teeth. Sheriff Beau did not enjoy that sound. He did not dislike it either. "Tank," Stone said quietly. Tank moved up behind Pierce without a word and stood there while the sheriff patted Pierce down. He did not touch Pierce. He did not have to. He was a 6'5" reminder of physics. Pierce had a thin gold money clip in one pocket with about $1,400 in hundreds. He had a passport in another pocket that was not his. The name on the passport was Vincent Allen Pearson. The photograph was Vincent Allen Pierce. Sheriff Bo turned the passport over in his hand once, and then he looked up at Stone with a new expression. "Mr. Brennan," he said, "I am going to ask you to keep an eye on this lady and her daughter for a few more minutes while I make some calls. Would that be all right with you?" "Yes, sir," Stone said. "I would also like to ask you to stay in the county for a few days. I think the district attorney is going to want a long talk with all of us." "We are not going anywhere, Sheriff." "Did not figure you were." Sheriff Bo cuffed Vincent Pierce one wrist at a time, polite and competent, the way he had cuffed several hundred drunks and a handful of worse men over the years, and he walked him to the back of the cruiser and put a hand on the top of his head to ease him down into the seat. The door closed. The lock thunked. The man in the gray suit sat behind the metal grill of a county vehicle in the white afternoon sun, and his face through the smudged glass did not look like an attorney's face anymore. It looked like the face of something that had been pulled up out of a hole and put in the light for the first time. He met Stone's eyes through the window. He did something then which Stone would remember later. He smiled. Not his salesman's smile, not his courtroom smile. It was a small, private, knowing smile. The smile of a man who even now, even with cuffs on his wrists, believed he was not finished. He mouthed a word through the glass. Stone read his lips. The word was wait. Stone looked at him a long second. Then he turned away from the cruiser and looked down at the little girl whose two fingers he was still somehow holding. "Junie May," he said. "Honey, you hungry?" She thought about it. "I am thirsty," she said. "Forge," Stone said. Forge straightened up off the sedan. "On it, boss." He went into the gas station with the unhurried walk of a man who had been a Navy cook for 16 years on 3 different ships and was not going to be hurried by anything west of the Pacific. He came back 4 minutes later with a cold bottle of grape soda and a small wrapped sandwich and a packet of orange crackers, and he held them all down at Junie May's height like a man at a 5-star dinner offering a tray. She looked at him. "Thank you," she whispered. "Ma'am," Forge said gravely, and that was the moment Junie May Marsh started to be a person again, instead of a small, wild thing that had been running for her life. The flatbed got there in 40 minutes. Della's sedan turned out when Wrench finally got under the hood to have a hairline crack in the block that explained the temperature gauge that had been climbing for 2 states. The car was finished. Wrench, who was a quiet, broad-shouldered man with grease, worked permanently into the lines of his hands, said so, the way a country doctor tells a family that the old dog has had a good life. "She is done, ma'am," he said to Della. "I am sorry she got you here, but she is done." Della looked at the sedan as if she had not really seen it in years. Then she looked at Junie May sitting on the curb in the shade of the gas station awning, with Raven beside her braiding a leather cord into a small bracelet around her wrist, talking to her about something quiet that made Junie May's mouth try very tentatively the shape of a smile. Della began to cry. It had been a long time since she had let herself cry like that. She had wept, certainly. She had wept into pillows and into the sleeves of cardigans and into the steam of the kitchen sink. But she had not stood in the open in the sun and let herself cry. She did it now. She did it without sound. The tears just ran down her face in 2 clean lines. Stone stood beside her without touching her. He did not say anything. He just stood there close enough that she could feel he was there. After a while she said, "I do not have anywhere to take her." "I know," Stone said. "I do not have any money. I do not have anywhere to go. I do not have anyone. My mother passed 2 years before Tad. I do not have anyone." "I know," Stone said. "He took the bank accounts. He had me sign things. He said it was for the insurance settlement. He said it was to protect Junie's future. He had me sign things, and I signed them because he said, 'You do not have to tell me here,' Stone said. 'We will sort it out.'" "I do not even know you," she whispered. "That is true," he said. "But you will get to, and I will get to know you, and we will see what makes sense after that. Right now there is a place you can be tonight where nobody is going to touch you, and nobody is going to come through the door. That is all that has to be true tonight. Just that one thing." She nodded. She nodded again. She kept nodding. After a long moment she stopped and she wiped her face on her sleeve and she straightened up half an inch, and she walked back into her own life with her chin a little higher than it had been all day. They rode out of the Red Mesa gas station in a slow, deliberate convoy in the late afternoon. Two bikes ahead. The black SUV in the middle, Raven driving Della in the passenger seat, Junie May in the back with a pillow Raven had produced from somewhere, and a paper cup of grape soda and the small leather bracelet on her wrist. Three bikes behind, Stone in front, the desert running gold and rust and long shadowed on either side as the sun went west. The teenage clerk at the gas station, whose name was Cody, watched them go through the fly-speck glass. He had stopped recording an hour ago. He had a video on his phone he was going to show in the next 48 hours to three deputies, two state investigators, one assistant district attorney, and the night editor of the Cottonwood Weekly paper. He did not know any of that yet. He just knew that he had seen something today that he had not seen before. The family in the minivan had left as soon as the cuffs went on Pierce. The father had driven slowly past the bikers on the way out and had lifted one tentative hand from the steering wheel. Stone had nodded back. The minivan had pulled onto the highway and accelerated away toward whatever town they were headed for, where they would tell this story for a week. By the time the convoy reached the long gravel drive that wound back off the county road to the clubhouse, the sun was a flat orange thing balanced on the edge of the western hills, and Junie May was asleep in the back of the SUV with her head on a pillow and one small hand curled around the soft-folded $20 bill. The clubhouse came up out of the gathering dusk in a way that did not match anything Della had been expecting. She had been expecting a bar. She had been expecting a yard full of broken motorcycles and beer cans. She had been expecting, if she was honest with herself, the kind of place she had seen in television movies about people like the men who had taken her in. What she saw as the SUV crunched up the long gravel drive and came around the last bend was a low, broad building with new siding and old bones. A converted warehouse, maybe, or a feed store from before the war. A high chain-link fence surrounded the property, but the fence had a row of flower boxes running along the inside of it, deep red geraniums and yellow marigolds, and a hand-painted sign on the gate that read, in plain block letters, Sons of Salvation. MC established 1998. The lot inside the fence was swept. The lot outside the fence was swept. There were two American flags on poles by the front door, lit by small ground lights, even though the sun had not finished setting yet, and a third flag below them. She did not recognize a black flag with the same skull and angel wings design she had seen on the back of every vest in the convoy. The big roll-up door at the front of the building was open. Inside, under bright industrial lights, she could see three motorcycles up on lifts in various states of repair, a long wall of pegboard hung with tools in their outlined places, and beyond that a wide-open room with a long, heavy wooden table and a kitchen and a stone fireplace at the far end. It looked like a fire station. It looked like a church. It looked like neither and like both. The bikes pulled into the lot one by one and shut down, and after the engines died, there was a soft ringing quiet that Della had not heard in a long time. Crickets, the cooling tick of metal, a dog barking far off in a neighbor's yard. Stone parked his bike and got off and stretched his back and walked over to the SUV. "Do not wake her," he said softly, looking through the window at the small sleeping face. "Raven, you and Doc get the mama set up in the guest room first. Get her some clean clothes, get her a sandwich. Let her shower if she wants to. I will carry the little one inside in a few minutes when we have got her bed ready." "Yes, boss," Raven said. "And Doc," Stone said. "Check the mama over. You hear me. Be polite. Be slow, but you check her. There has been more than that one bruise." "I figured," Doc said quietly. Stone turned and walked toward the open front door. Ghost fell in beside him without being asked. "Boss," Ghost said in a voice meant for Stone only. "I know," Stone said. "He is not going to stay in that cell. I know. He has got money behind him. Not his money, somebody else's. I know. He looked at you before they shut the door. I saw him. That was not a man who thinks he just got caught. That was a man who thinks he just made a phone call. I know." They walked another few steps in the dust. "Boss," Ghost said. Stone stopped at the door and looked out across the lot at the lengthening shadows. "Run him deep," Stone said quietly. "Every name, every account, every property, every business. Do not stop at the first wall. Go through it. I want to know who he works for. I want to know who has been writing his checks. I want to know what kind of phone call he thought he could make from the back of that cruiser. That will take some time. Take it." Ghost nodded once and walked away into the building, his phone already coming up out of his pocket, his thumbs already moving. Stone stood in the doorway a moment longer. He looked back at the SUV, at the closed door of the back seat, at the very small shape of a sleeping child behind the tinted glass. Then he went inside to make sure they had clean sheets on the cot in the small spare room at the back of the building, the room with the one window that looked out onto the geraniums, the room with the lock on the inside of the door and not the outside. The clubhouse came alive around them in the next hour, the way a barracks does when a man's brought home off a long deployment. Quietly, efficiently, with nobody making a fuss and everybody doing their job. Forge took over the kitchen and started making grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, because grilled cheese and tomato soup were what you fed people who had not eaten a real meal in a while and did not know if they could keep one down. He cut the crusts off the sandwiches without saying a word about it, which was something he had not done for any of the men in 25 years, and the men noticed and said nothing. Doc sat with Della at the long table in the corner farthest from any window, and he did exactly what he had said he would do. He was slow, he was polite, he asked her permission for every single thing. He asked her if he could look at the bruise on her arm. He asked her if he could check her ribs. He asked her if she had any other places that hurt. He did not write anything down. He did not take any pictures. He just looked and he listened, and after a long time he said gently, "Ma'am, you have been carrying this for a while." Della looked at her hands. "Almost a year," she said. "Anything broken that did not get set right?" "He did not break me," she said. "He did not have to. He just had to make me afraid of what would happen to my daughter if I left." "Yes, ma'am," Doc said. "That is the worst kind, the kind that does not show." She looked up at him. "You sound like you know." "I was a medic in 3 wars," Doc said. "I know about all the kinds of hurt there are." Raven took Junie May, who had half woken when Stone carried her in and had blinked at the lights in the new room and decided she was still safe, into the small back room, and got her into a clean, oversized t-shirt that came down to her knees, which was the smallest thing the clubhouse had. She brushed the little girl's hair out and rebraided it loose for sleeping. She put the little leather bracelet on the nightstand within reach. She put the folded $20 bill on top of the leather bracelet because Junie May would not put it down for anyone, not even her mother. "Sleep, baby," Raven said. "Nobody comes through this door tonight unless I let them." "Where is my mom?" Junie May said, already going under. "She is right down the hall. She is eating soup. You want me to bring her in here when she is done?" "Yes." "Then I will." Raven sat with her until her breathing went long and slow, and her hand on the pillow uncurled the way a child's hand uncurls only when there is nothing left to be afraid of. Then she got up and went out and closed the door behind her so softly the latch did not make a sound. In the main room, Stone was sitting in an old leather armchair by the cold fireplace with a coffee mug in his hand and an expression on his face like a man listening to a sound only he could hear. Tank was on the long bench by the wall eating a sandwich, watching the front door. Forge was washing up at the sink. Ghost was at a small desk in the corner, 3 laptops open in front of him, the blue light of the screens on his face. The front door was locked. The roll-up door was down. 2 of the younger members Mandela had not met yet were walking the perimeter of the fence in opposite directions, one with a flashlight and one without. Della came out of the small back hallway and stopped in the doorway looking at the room. She had been afraid at the gas station that these men were dangerous. They were. She had been afraid that they were criminals. They were not, but it would have been hard to explain the difference to a stranger. What she had not been prepared for was this. This was not a clubhouse. This was a watch. She walked slow across the wide wooden floor. She sat down in the armchair opposite Stone's with the cold fireplace between them. She held the soup mug Forge had pressed into her hands, and she did not drink from it yet because her hands were trembling too hard to lift it without spilling. Stone looked at her over the rim of his coffee mug. He did not start. He let her start. After a long time, she said, "Why?" That was the whole question. Stone looked at the cold fireplace. Outside, a long way off, a coyote called once and was answered by another coyote. The crickets paused for a few seconds, the way they do when there is a sound in the dark, and then they started up again. Stone set his coffee down on the floor beside his boot. "I had a sister once," he said. The fire was not lit. The room was dim around the small lamp on Ghost's desk. The black shapes of the framed photographs on the mantel were just shapes. He did not look up at any of them. He looked at the dark mouth of the fireplace. "Her name was Emily," he said. "She was 9 years old when this story starts. I was 15. Della did not move. She had set the mug down on the small table at her elbow. Her hands were folded in her lap. My daddy was dead. He had been gone a long time. My mama did her best. She was a waitress at a diner outside Tucson, and she worked the late shift because the tips were better, and she came home at 4 in the morning smelling like coffee and bacon grease. She raised us in a little house on a dirt street. Emily was the smart one. Emily wanted to be a vet. Emily used to bring home every stray cat in 3 blocks and hide them under the back porch. He smiled a small, dry, private smile at the dark hearth. In 1985, a man came into the diner. He came in on Tuesdays. He always sat in my mama's section. He wore a brown suit with a vest and a watch on a chain. He worked at the bank downtown. He had a smile like he had practiced it in a mirror. He was kind to my mama. He was the first man who had been kind to her in 8 years. He took her to dinner. He took her dancing. He bought Emily a Sunday dress, and Emily would not take it off. She wore it to school for a week. He bought me a Schwinn 10-speed. I had never had a new bike in my life. I rode it until the chain wore out. He paused. He moved in with us in the spring of '86. By July, he was paying our bills. By August, he had keys to the front door. By September, he stopped. He had stopped here 100 times in 40 years. He had never gotten past this point with another human being who was not in the club. He looked across the cold fireplace at Delamarche, and Delamarche, who had been a quiet school teacher and a young widow, and for 14 months, a woman without a name of her own, looked back at him and waited. By September, he said, I knew something was wrong with my sister. I did not know what it was. I was 15. Nobody had ever told me what to look for. She had stopped bringing home strays. She had stopped drawing. She would not sit on the couch when he was in the room. She would not go in the bathroom while he was in the house. She slept with the lamp on. She wet the bed. My mama said it was a phase. My mama did not want to look at what it was, because if she looked at what it was, she had to leave him. And we could not leave him, you understand? We needed him. He was paying the rent. He was paying for the groceries. He was paying for the doctor when I broke my arm coming off that 10-speed. He breathed in. I tried to tell my mama in October. I tried to tell her in November. She would not hear it. She said I was jealous. She said I missed being the man of the house. She said I would get used to him. She said I just needed to be a good boy and not make trouble. He breathed out. On the 5th of December, Emily wrote a letter. She left it on the kitchen table. She walked down to the wash behind the house. There was a tree at the bottom of the wash. There was rope in the shed. Della put both hands over her mouth. She did not say anything. She did not interrupt. She did not gasp. The tears just came down her face the way they had at the gas station, steady and quiet like rain on a window. She was 11 years old, Stone said. She had had her birthday in August. He gave her a charm bracelet. I broke that bracelet in half with a hammer after the funeral, and I threw the pieces in the wash. The room was very still. The police came, he said, Dishan. They were kind. The deputy who came was a young man, very young. He was crying when he left. The detective who came after, he was older. The coroner asked Emily's body questions. The answers were as clear as the noonday sun. Everybody in our town knew the answers within a week. The man in the brown suit was arrested. There was a hearing. There was a grand jury. There was not enough physical evidence to charge him with what he had done to her, because Emily had not told anyone because she had been 11, because he had told her things would happen to me and to my mama if she did. They charged him with statutory offenses related to her death. He hired a lawyer from Phoenix. The lawyer was good. The lawyer found a clerical problem with one of the search warrants. The judge threw the case out. He walked out of that courthouse in his brown suit, and he got into a Lincoln, and he drove away. And as far as I know, he is still alive somewhere right now in this world. Stone looked up. He looked across at Delamarche. His eyes were dry. They were the driest part of him. That is why, he said. He picked up his coffee. My mama drank herself to death in 1989. I joined the Army in 1990. I came home in 97 and I started this club in 98. I started it with 3 other men who had each lost somebody to a man in a clean suit. We started it because we had a rule. The rule was that we were going to spend the rest of our lives being the wall that should have been there for our sisters and our mothers and our brothers and us. We were going to be loud, and we were going to be ugly, and we were going to be on the road when the call came. We were not going to do nothing. We were never going to do nothing again. He took a sip of the coffee. It had gone cold. He swallowed it anyway. That little girl in the back room, he said, is wearing a yellow dress. Emily had a yellow dress. Emily wore it for Easter in 1985. I have a photograph of her in it. I keep it in a drawer in the room I sleep in upstairs. I look at it about twice a year. I looked at it this morning. Della found her voice. It was small. She did not try to make it large. You looked at it this morning, she said. This morning, before I got on the bike, before I rode to the Red Mesa for gas. I do that sometimes. I look at her on the days I feel her close. He set the coffee back down. I have been a man for a long time, ma'am. I have done good things, and I have done bad things. I have done things in service of a flag, and I have done worse than that on no flag at all. I do not believe in much. I do not believe in luck. I do not believe in signs. He looked at her. But your daughter ran across that parking lot today in a yellow dress holding the $20 bill I gave a woman in a diner I was never going to see again. And she ran past 4 other men and she came to me. His voice did not change. It stayed level. It stayed gravel. I do not believe in signs, ma'am, but I know what I am supposed to do. Della Marsh slid out of the armchair and onto the wooden floor between them. She did not kneel exactly. She just came down slowly the way a person comes down when they cannot stand anymore. She sat on the boards with her legs folded under her hands in her lap, her face wet, and she looked up at the man across the cold fireplace. Tad was murdered, she said. Stone did not answer. I knew it, she said. I have known it for 14 months. I knew it the day the foreman called and told me there had been an accident at the site. I knew it when the insurance investigator came to the door and would not look me in the eye. I knew it when Vincent showed up at the wake with a folder and a sympathy card. I knew it. I knew it. I knew it. And I could not say it because there was nobody to say it to. Because every time I said it, Vincent told me I was sick, and Vincent told me I needed to rest, and Vincent told me they would take Junie May. What was Tad's job? Stone asked quiet. He was an insurance investigator. He worked for a company that audited claims, mostly small stuff. Auto, storm damage. But in the last 6 months before he died, he was on a bigger one. He did not tell me much. He said it was a fund. He said it was a veterans fund. He said somebody had been moving money in and out of accounts that did not make sense. He said when he was done with the file, somebody was going to jail. He said it was going to be a big one. You ever hear him say a name? He never said names at home. He said it kept me safe not to know. She paused. But one night, late on the phone in the kitchen, I came down for water. He was talking to his boss. He did not see me. He said one name, a first name. He said it was the man at the top of the whole thing. She closed her eyes. He said Hollis. The silence in the clubhouse went so deep for half a second that you could hear the second hand on the old wall clock by the kitchen. Tank on the bench across the room looked up from his sandwich. Forge at the sink stopped washing the cup in his hand. Doc in the corner took his hand off the table and laid it flat against his thigh. Ghost did not look up from his laptops, but his thumb stopped moving. Stone did not move at all. For one long breath, he was as still as the stones the men called him for. Then he leaned forward slowly until his elbows were on his knees, and he looked at Della Marsh across 2 feet of empty space, and his eyes were no longer quiet. Della, he said. He had not used her name before. Tomorrow I am going to ask you to tell me everything you remember, every conversation, every paper Vincent had you sign, every name that ever came out of his mouth. We are going to go slow and we are going to write it down. Tonight I want you to eat that soup and I want you to take a shower if you can, and I want you to sleep next to your daughter, and I want you to know one thing. She waited. I know that name, he said. She looked at him. I knew it before you said it, he said. Tank set his sandwich down. Forge turned off the water at the sink. Doc reached up to the lamp at his elbow and turned it down by half. Outside in the dark beyond the fence, the 2 younger members on perimeter walked past each other on opposite corners of the lot, nodded and kept moving. Della Marsh, who had run out of strength sometime around noon, finally let herself feel how tired she was. She slumped forward just a little and Stone reached across the cold fireplace and put his big rough hand on top of her small folded ones, and he held them there a second, and that was all he did. Go on to bed, ma'am, he said gently. Be with your girl. We will talk when the sun comes up. She nodded. She got to her feet very slow on legs that did not quite work. She picked up the soup mug because she had been raised to clear her place at a table. Forge took it from her gently at the kitchen as she passed. He nodded at her with his one good eye. She walked down the hall to the small back room with the geraniums in the window box. She pushed the door open. The lamp was on low. Her 7-year-old daughter was asleep on the cot with one hand under her cheek and the soft folded $20 bill on the nightstand and the little leather bracelet next to it. She looked smaller than she had in months. She looked like a child. Della took off her shoes. She slid in next to her daughter on the narrow cot. She put one arm around the small, warm body that smelled for the first time in a long time of soap. She closed her eyes. She did not even mean to. She was asleep inside of 2 minutes. In the main room, Stone sat for a long time without moving. Tank came over after a while and sat down in the armchair Della had been in. He did not say anything for 10 minutes. "It cannot be him," Tank said finally. "Boss, the world has got more than one Hollis in it." "It is him," Stone said. "You do not know that. It is him, boss. He never went away, Tank. Men like that do not go away. They just find new houses and new women and new diners to sit down in. He would be old by now, he would be old. But he would still be doing it. He would be teaching other men how to do it. He would be running a piece of something bigger." Tank looked into the cold fireplace for a long time. "Ghost," he said quietly without turning his head. "Yeah," Ghost said from his desk. "Pull every Hollis you can find connected to any kind of Veterans Fund financial advising conservatorship work in any state going back 10 years. Already started." "What did you find?" Ghost paused the way a man pauses before he says a thing he does not want to say out loud in front of his brothers. "There is a wealth management consultancy in Scottsdale," Ghost said. "Boutique outfit, caters to military widows. The principal partner is on the board of 3 different veterans charities. Big donor, has his picture on a wall at the VA hospital in Phoenix. 82 years old. Quiet retirement age legend, the kind of man who gets honored at banquets. His first name is on the door of the firm." He paused. "The first name is Hollis." Stone closed his eyes. He sat in the leather armchair by the cold fireplace, with the 7-year-old girl asleep one room over with her mother and the soft folded $20 bill on the nightstand. And he closed his eyes, and behind the closed lids, he saw his sister Emily, 9 years old, holding up a stray cat by the back porch in the summer of 1985, asking him if they could keep it. "Please, just this one, Wyatt, please." When he opened his eyes again, there were no tears in them. But there was a thing in them that had not been there at the start of the day. A thing that had been sleeping for 40 years and had stirred at the Red Mesa gas station when a small girl in a yellow dress put a folded $20 bill into his open hand. It was wide awake now. "Tank," Stone said. "Yeah, boss. Tomorrow we lock this place down. Every door, every window, camera on every angle of the fence. 2 men on the gate at all times. Nobody comes onto this property who is not a brother or who has not been cleared by Ghost. The mama and the girl do not leave this lot." "Understood. Call the chapter presidents. North chapter, East chapter, West chapter. Tell them what is happening. Tell them to stand by. We may need them." "Understood." "Doc." "Yeah, boss. Get me a list of every safe house on our route between here and Albuquerque. Every brother we trust. Every empty cabin we can use. I want options." "On it." "Ghost." "Boss. You are going to find me everything there is to find about Hollis and Pierce and the company in Scottsdale. Every account, every property, every charity, every name on every board, every check that has been written, and every check that has been cashed. I do not care how long it takes. I do not care what it costs. You go through every wall there is." "Yes, boss." "Brothers." The 4 men in the room looked at him. "This is not a rescue anymore," Stone said quietly. "This is the rest of it." Tank stood up. Forge dried his hands. Doc lowered the lamp another notch. Ghost did not look up from his screens, but the small blue glow on his face did not flicker. Outside in the dark, beyond the high chain-link fence, a slow vehicle came up the county road, paused at the mouth of the long gravel drive, and then went past. Its headlights did not turn in. Not tonight. But somewhere in the night, in a holding cell at the county jail, Vincent Pierce sat on a bunk with his pressed shirt wrinkled and his manicured hands folded in his lap, and he smiled his small private smile at the concrete wall, and he waited for his one phone call. And on the cot in the small back room with her mother's arm around her and the soft folded $20 bill within reach of her hand, 7-year-old Junie Mae Marsh slept the first full night's sleep she had slept in 14 months. The clubhouse held the dark around her like a closed fist. Morning came in slow and gold over the desert behind the clubhouse, the kind of light that picks out every blade of dry grass and lays it down again somewhere new. The roosters from the property next door, two unreasonable birds that nobody in the club had ever managed to convince the neighbor to send to the soup pot, started their argument at 5:15. By 6, the long table in the main room had coffee on it. By 6:30, it had eggs and ham and biscuits. By 7, when Junie Mae Marsh walked into the main room in the oversized t-shirt and her bare feet and her hair sticking up in the back, 4 large men in leather vests stood up from the table at the same time. Without thinking about it, the way men stand up when a lady walks into a room, and then looked at each other in a moment of mild confusion at having done it for a 7-year-old. She stopped in the doorway. The whole long table was looking at her. She looked at the food. She looked at the men. She looked at Stone. "Is there bacon?" she said. Forge at the kitchen made a small sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else. "There is bacon, ma'am," he said gravely. "Can I have some?" "You can have all of it." She walked across the room with her chin up the way only small children can do, and she climbed up into the chair next to Stone's, and Forge brought her a plate, and Tank quietly passed her the salt without being asked, and Doc poured her a small glass of orange juice, and Della came out of the back hallway a minute later in a clean shirt that did not belong to her, and she stopped in the doorway just the way her daughter had stopped, and she put one hand against the doorframe to steady herself, because she had walked into a room full of men eating breakfast, and there was a place set for her. There was a place set for her at a table in the morning in a house she was safe in. She had not had that in 14 months. Stone caught her eye across the room. He did not smile. He just lifted his chin half an inch toward the empty chair across from Junie Mae. Della sat down. She ate slow at first, then less slow, then like a woman who had not been eating enough for a very long time. Nobody said anything about it. Tank passed her the biscuits without being asked. Forge brought her a second plate. Doc poured her coffee, and when she asked for cream, Raven slid a small pitcher across the table without comment. When Junie Mae finished her bacon, she looked up at Stone. "Can I see the bikes?" she said. Stone considered her over the rim of his coffee mug. "After breakfast," he said. "And shoes." "I do not have shoes." "Raven will fix that." "Okay," Junie Mae said. She went back to her eggs. That was the morning. For 2 weeks it went on like that. Raven took Della into town the second day with Tank driving and Doc in the passenger seat and 2 more bikes following, and they bought Della and Junie Mae 3 changes of clothes apiece at the discount store on Main Street. The owner of the store, a woman named Bet, who had grown up in Cottonwood and had once been on a county softball team with Sheriff Bo's late wife, watched the convoy pull into her parking lot through the front window and watched the woman and the little girl come in surrounded by leather. And Bet's face did something complicated, and then Bet picked up the phone behind the counter and made a call. The call was to her sister-in-law at the bank. The sister-in-law made another call. By the end of that afternoon, the soft underground of small-town women who actually run small towns was already in motion. By the end of the week, Della had 3 different offers of dinner brought to the clubhouse gate by women she had never met, and Junie Mae had 2 stuffed animals, a coloring book, a box of new crayons, and a small pair of pink shoes that fit left in a paper bag on the front step before sunrise. The men of the club watched all this with the bemused dignity of soldiers who have discovered that the local civilians are in fact on their side. Inside the fence, the lockdown was real. Tank rotated 4 men on the gate, 2 on day shift, 2 on night. Wrench installed 3 new cameras along the back fence. Ghost worked 16 hours a day at his desk, 2 more laptops added to the original 3, going through every wall there was to go through. Stone watched the road. On day 3, Sheriff Bo came up the long gravel drive in his cruiser with his hat in his hand, and he sat down at the long table and accepted a cup of Forge's coffee, and he said what he had come to say. "Pierce made bail this morning," Sheriff Bo said. Stone did not look surprised. "$500,000, Sheriff Bo said. "Cash. Posted by a lawyer who flew in from Phoenix yesterday afternoon and stayed in a hotel that costs more per night than my truck note. The lawyer is named Crane. He is a serious man. He has done work for very serious people. Hollis, Stone said. Sheriff Bo's eyebrows came up half an inch. How do you know that name? I have a long memory, Sheriff. Sheriff Bo looked at him for a moment. Mr. Brennan, he said carefully, I have been getting phone calls. Phone calls from people above me. People who are not from this county. The phone calls are polite. The phone calls suggest that this is a complicated case and a sensitive case, and that perhaps the case file would be better off being routed up to the state level where the proper resources can be brought to bear. And what do you say to those phone calls, Sheriff? I say, yes, sir, of course, sir, I will take that under advisement, sir. And then I hang up the phone and I go right on doing my job. But I want you to understand something, Mr. Brennan. The phone calls are happening. Somebody very much wants this case to go away, or at least to leave Cottonwood. And with my retirement coming up the road, I have got plenty of reasons to look the other way, and I am going to do my job anyway. But I want you to know what I am doing it inside of. Because that little girl down the hall is a witness. That little girl is the only living witness against a man who has now walked back out into the world. Do you understand me? I understand you, Sheriff. He will come for her. Yes. Not himself. He will send people. Yes. You are ready for that. Stone looked at the sheriff across the table. Sheriff, Stone said, I have been ready for that for 40 years. Sheriff Bo nodded once. He drank his coffee. He set the mug down. He stood up. There is one more thing, he said. The phone calls. They are not all coming from above me. One of them yesterday came from a number I traced back to a federal field office in Phoenix. The voice on the other end did not identify herself. The voice asked very specifically about the welfare of the witness in the Pierce matter. I told the voice that the witness was a minor child and that her welfare was being looked after. He paused. The voice on the other end said, and I am quoting, You tell the gentlemen of the Sons of Salvation that they are not alone in this. The voice then hung up. Stone considered that. You know who it was, he said. I have a guess. Care to share? Not yet. I want to be sure. But Mr. Brennan, if I am right, somebody has been working this case for a lot longer than 2 weeks. Somebody at the federal level. And somebody at the federal level has been waiting for a thread to come loose. I think a thread came loose at the Red Mesa gas station. Sheriff Bo put his hat on. I will be in touch, he said. He walked out into the sun. Stone sat at the table a long time after he was gone. Then he turned his head and said quietly, Ghost. Ghost looked up from his screens at the end of the room. Find me the woman who called the sheriff. On it. Ghost found her in 11 hours. Her name was Margaret Ainsworth. She was 45 years old. She had spent 18 years as a special agent in the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI, the last 6 of those years in the Phoenix field office. She had a wall in her office full of citations and one wall full of photographs of widows. She had been quietly building a file on a Scottsdale wealth management firm for 3.5 years. And for 3.5 years, her file had not gone anywhere, because every time she got close to filing for warrants, somebody 1 or 2 levels up had quietly redirected her resources to other matters. She came up the long gravel drive on day 5 in a plain government sedan by herself, with a small black file box on the passenger seat, and she stopped at the gate and showed her credentials to Tank, and Tank looked at the credentials a long time, and then looked at her face a long time, and then opened the gate. She sat across from Stone at the long table for 2 hours. She did not waste words. Mr. Brennan, she said, I have a problem. I have known about Hollis Greaves and the Greaves Group for almost 4 years. I have not been able to make a case. Every time I get close, my information walks. Every time I push for warrants, my budget gets cut. Every time I get a witness, my witness gets settled out of court with a non-disclosure agreement, or my witness vanishes, or my witness changes her mind. I have lost 3 witnesses in 3 years. 2 of them are now dead. One of them is in a long-term care facility in New Mexico with what her family was told was a stroke. I do not believe it was a stroke. She set her hand flat on the small black file box. I have in this box every name, every account, every property, every charity, every shell, company, every dummy, LLC, every cooperating attorney, every cooperating financial planner, every middle manager, and every senior partner of the Greaves Group going back to 2007. I have what I believe is enough information to take down everyone in the organization from Vincent Pierce all the way to Hollis Greaves himself. What I do not have, and what I have never been able to keep alive long enough to put in front of a grand jury, is a witness. She looked at Stone. You have one. Stone looked back at her. Mrs. Marsh, he said. Yes. And the little girl. The little girl is corroboration. The little girl will not be required to testify if Mrs. Marsh is willing, and if the murder of Thaddeus Marsh can be established through forensic and documentary evidence, both of which I believe are recoverable if I can get a federal warrant on the original worksite. Stone considered. You think you can keep her alive? He said quietly, after what happened to your other three. No, sir, Margaret Ainsworth said. I do not think I can, not alone. She looked around the long room, at Tank at the front of the building, at Forge in the kitchen, at Doc by the back door, at the cameras up in the corners, at the hand-painted sign on the gate. But I do not think she is alone, she said. For 2 more days, Della Marsh sat with Margaret Ainsworth at the long table, and Margaret Ainsworth pulled documents out of the file box one at a time, and Della Marsh looked at them and named names. She named the conversation in the kitchen the night her husband died. She named the folder Vincent Pierce had brought to the wake. She named the papers she had signed, and what room of the house she had signed them in, and what she had been wearing, and what time of day it had been. She named the addresses of the 3 other houses Vincent Pierce had driven her to in the months after Thaddeus's death, 2 in Phoenix and 1 in Sedona. And at one of those houses, she said there had been an older man in a wheelchair on a back patio with an oxygen tube under his nose, and Vincent Pierce had taken her over and introduced her, and the old man had taken her hand in both of his and looked at her with eyes that were not the eyes of a kind old grandfather. And the old man had said, "You are going to be just fine, dear. We take such good care of our girls." Margaret Ainsworth, listening to that, did not move, but the muscle along her jaw moved. What did Vincent call him, she said. Mr. Greaves, Della said. What did Mr. Greaves wear on his right hand? A heavy gold ring. Initials. An H, a gold H with small stones around it. I thought they were diamonds, but they were so small I could not really see. Margaret Ainsworth's hand on the file box trembled just once and went still. I have been looking for that ring, she said quietly, for 3.5 years. The next morning, Forge went into town for the run he always made on Tuesdays, the run for produce and milk, and the heavy white bread Junie May had taken a liking to at breakfast. He took 2 brothers with him because Stone insisted, and he took the older of the club's 2 pickups because the truck was less visible than the bikes. Forge was a careful man, 63 years old, 16 years Navy, 24 years cooking professionally before he came to the club. He had survived a galley fire on a destroyer in 1988 that had taken his left eye and killed 2 of his shipmates, and he had not lived another 38 years past that fire by being careless. He noticed the second car in the grocery store parking lot before he got out of the truck. He noticed the third car when he came out of the store with 2 bags. He told the brothers quietly to walk wide and watch the angles, and they did. They almost made it back to the truck. 3 men came around the side of the building between the dumpster and the recycling cans. They were not particularly large men. They were not particularly small. They had the loose, easy walk of men who do this kind of work for a living, and they did not say anything at all before the first one swung a short black object out from behind his leg. It was a tire iron. Forge dropped the grocery bags. The carton of eggs hit the ground, and one of the brothers said a word. What happened in the next 40 seconds happened fast. Forge took a hit to the back of his head before he got fully turned around. He went down on one knee on the asphalt. The 2 brothers, both of them, younger and faster than Forge, were on the 3 men before the second swing came down. There was a short, ugly noise of bodies meeting bodies. One of the 3 men got into the back of a waiting sedan, and the sedan tore out of the lot before the deputies arrived, leaving the other 2 on the ground. One of the 2 left behind had a broken nose. The other had a broken arm and was crying. Forge was on his hands and knees in the parking lot with blood running down the side of his face and into the collar of his shirt. Forge, the younger of the 2 brothers said, kneeling next to him. Forge, hey, look at me, brother. How many fingers? 3, Forge said. I see your 3 fingers. Get my groceries. Junie May wants pancakes Saturday. He swayed. Get my goddamn groceries, he said, and then he passed out. They got him to the small county hospital in Cottonwood inside of 7 minutes. He woke up halfway through getting 12 stitches put in the back of his head, looked up at the doctor, said, Doc, I left a carton of eggs in the lot. Somebody needs to go back for those eggs. And then passed out again. Stone got to the hospital before the stitches were finished. He came in with Tank behind him and Ghost behind Tank, and the deputy at the front desk took one look at his face and stepped aside without making either of them sign in. Stone stood at the foot of Forge's bed for a long time without saying anything. Forge opened his good eye. "Boss," he said. "Brother," Stone said. "They had a man with them, boss, the one who got into the car. He had a ring on, gold ring. I saw it when he came around the side. He was not with them, boss. He was watching them. He was the one running them." Stone breathed out slow. "Was it a H, brother?" "It was a H, boss, with little stones." "You sure?" "Boss," Forge said, "I lost an eye on a Navy ship in 1988. I am very particular about what I see with the one I got left." Stone reached out and laid his big rough hand on Forge's blanketed foot very gently. "Thank you, brother," he said. He turned around. He walked out of the hospital room and down the polished hallway and out into the parking lot, and the sky over Cottonwood was the soft pink of late afternoon, and the air was the smell of creosote after rain, and Stone walked all the way to the far end of the parking lot behind the old generator shed, and he leaned his forehead against the cinder block wall. He did not punch the wall. He did not yell at the sky. He stood there, with his forehead against the rough, cool block for a long time, and after a while his shoulders came up and went back down and up and back down. Very small, very quiet, like a man who had been carrying something for a long, long time and had just been allowed for 1 minute to set it down. When he came back around the corner of the shed, his face was his face again. Tank was waiting for him. Tank did not say anything. "Let us go home," Stone said. That night in the main room of the clubhouse, with Forge propped up in the leather armchair by the cold fireplace, with 12 stitches and a small, careful turban of gauze and a plate of Della's pot roast in his lap, Stone called the meeting. Every man and woman who wore the patch was there. The 18 members of the home chapter, the 3 road captains from the North chapter who had ridden in that morning, the 2 senior officers from the East chapter who had come the night before, 24 people in leather around the long table and standing along the walls. Stone did not stand at the head of the table. He stood at the side of it. "Brothers," he said. "Sister." He looked at every one of them in turn. "We are about to make a choice," he said. "I want every one of you to make it with both eyes open." He told them. He told them about Hollis Greaves and the Greaves Group and the 3 witnesses Margaret Ainsworth had lost. He told them about the murder of Thaddeus Marsh. He told them about the gold ring with the H. He told them about a 9-year-old girl named Emily who had died in 1986. And he told them in a voice that he kept very level about a man in a brown suit who had walked out of a courthouse and into a Lincoln and away. He told them that the federal government was prepared to move on the Greaves Group with Della Marsh and the documents in Margaret Ainsworth's small black file box as the heart of the case. He told them that the Greaves Group had now today, in their own town, in their own parking lot, sent 3 men with tire irons to put hands on a brother. "This is no longer a rescue," he said. "This is the rest of it." He paused. "I am not asking you to stand a watch. I am asking you to stand inside a war. I am asking you to put your lives, your families, your homes, and your jobs on the line for one mother and one little girl who you did not know 2 weeks ago. I am asking you because I do not have anybody else to ask. I am asking you because we built this club for this exact day." He looked at Tank. I want it said out loud, brother by brother. Anyone who needs to step out of this, you step out. There is no shame. There is no club discipline. There is no judgment. We protect kids. We do not require any brother to die for one. Speak your piece. Yes or no?" Tank stood up. "Yes," Tank said. "Doc." "Yes." "Wrench." "Yes." "Raven." "Yes." Forge from the armchair did not stand. He raised his fork. "Yes." "Ghost." "Yes." It went around the room 24 times. It came back to Stone. He looked at them. His brothers. His sister. All of them with the patch on their chest. All of them who, like him, had come from somewhere. They had needed a wall and had not had one. All of them who had built this house with their own hands 28 years ago to be the wall they had needed. "All right," he said quietly. "Then this is what we are going to do." The week that followed was the week that the long, careful machine of a federal investigation which had been jammed for 3.5 years finally moved. Margaret Ainsworth filed for federal warrants on day 8. She got them on day 9. On the morning of day 11 at 6 a.m., simultaneous raids hit 9 locations across the state of Arizona, 2 in Nevada, 1 in Southern California, and 1 in Phoenix. The Greaves Group headquarters in Scottsdale was sealed. 2 safe houses in Phoenix were searched. The worksite where Thaddeus Marsh had died was re-examined by a federal forensic team, and within 48 hours, a quiet revision was filed to the original accident report, and a quiet phone call was made to a federal prosecutor. Vincent Pierce was rearrested on day 12. This time the charge was not assault. This time the charges were murder in furtherance of a continuing criminal enterprise, racketeering, conspiracy, wire fraud, and the rest of the count sheet the federal grand jury could fit on a piece of paper. Hollis Greaves was arrested on day 14. He was arrested in the back garden of his house in Scottsdale in a wheelchair with an oxygen tube under his nose. He was 82 years old. The agents who arrested him were polite. He did not resist. He was wearing the gold ring on his right hand. He looked up at the lead agent, who happened to be Margaret Ainsworth, and he smiled the smile of a kind old grandfather, and he said, "My dear, has there been some misunderstanding?" Margaret Ainsworth did not smile back. "Hollis Greaves, she said, you are under arrest for racketeering, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and 117 related counts. You have the right to remain silent." He kept smiling at her all the way to the car. Stone watched it on the small television in the corner of the main room of the clubhouse in the late afternoon. The local news had the footage of Hollis being wheeled down his own driveway. They cut to the gold ring on his hand. They froze the image and zoomed in. The H was clearly visible. The small stones around it were clearly visible. Stone watched it without moving. Junie May, sitting on the arm of his chair with a coloring book in her lap, looked up at the screen for a moment. "Is that him?" she said. "That is him," Stone said. "He is old." "Yes, ma'am. He looks like somebody's grandpa." "That is what made him good at his job, honey." She thought about that for a moment. "That is not a very good job," she said. "No, ma'am," Stone said. "It is not." She went back to her coloring book. She was working on a picture of a horse. She was being very careful to stay inside the lines. The trial of Vincent Pierce was the one that made the papers. He was tried first in federal court in Phoenix on the murder of Thaddeus Marsh, which had been folded into the larger Greaves Group racketeering case through the wire fraud and conspiracy counts. The full federal case against the Greaves Group itself was complicated and slow, and would in the end take 14 months to bring to verdict. But the Pierce trial moved fast. Della Marsh took the stand on the 3rd day. She wore a plain navy dress that Bet from the discount store had let her pick out for free, and she wore her hair pulled back in a clip that Raven had given her, and she carried a small white tissue in one hand that she did not use the entire time she was up there. She told the story. She told it from the wake when Vincent Pierce arrived with a folder and a sympathy card. She told it through the slow tightening of his hands around every bank account and every signature and every doctor's appointment. She told it through the night he had hit her on the arm because she had asked him a question he had not wanted asked. She told it through the morning at the Red Mesa gas station when her 7-year-old daughter had walked out of the back seat of her car and made a choice that had saved both their lives. She did not cry on the stand. She had cried already. She had cried for 14 months. She was done crying. The jury was out for 4 hours. Vincent Pierce was convicted on every count. He received life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. He did not look at Della when the verdict was read. He looked instead at Stone sitting in the back of the courtroom in a clean white shirt and a plain dark jacket and a single small pin on his lapel, a skull with angel wings. Pierce smiled. He still believed even then that he had played the game right. He still believed someone was coming for him. No one was coming for him. Hollis Greaves in the federal trial 14 months later would be convicted on more counts than the indictment had room for. The judge, taking into account his age and frail health, sentenced him to 25 years in federal prison rather than the life term the prosecution requested. It made no practical difference. He would serve 11 months of that sentence before dying in the prison infirmary of complications related to congestive heart failure. He would die in a bed in a state institution alone with no visitors on a Thursday afternoon, while a nurse he had insulted 40 minutes earlier finally came back to check on him. But before any of that, Stone went to see him. He went to see him on the morning of the day Hollis was transferred from county holding to federal intake. He went alone. Margaret Ainsworth arranged it without asking him why. She did not ask him why because she did not need to. She had read the original 1986 case file by then. Stone sat down across a small metal table from Hollis Greaves in a small concrete room with a window of reinforced glass and a deputy outside the door. Hollis was in the wheelchair. The oxygen tube was under his nose. The gold ring was no longer on his hand. The ring had been cataloged as evidence. He looked across the table at Stone with cloudy old eyes and a polite, slightly puzzled smile. "I am sorry, sir," he said. "Have we met?" Stone did not answer the question. He set a photograph on the table. It was a small, square, faded photograph with rounded corners and a crease running diagonally across one corner from being kept in a drawer too long. The photograph was of a 9-year-old girl in a yellow Easter dress standing in front of a brick wall, holding a small black and white kitten up to the camera. Her hair was in 2 braids. She had 2 missing front teeth. She was laughing. Hollis looked at the photograph. His face did not change. He did not pretend to remember, and he did not pretend to be confused. His face simply did not change. Stone watched his face not change. That was the answer. Stone had been ready for almost anything that morning. He had been ready for Hollis to deny knowing her. He had been ready for Hollis to make excuses. He had been ready for Hollis to apologize. He had been ready in the dark, wide back of his own mind for Hollis to weep even and beg. He had not been ready for nothing. Hollis Greaves looked at the photograph of Emily Brennan, age 9, in her yellow Easter dress in 1985, and he felt nothing at all about it. She was less than nothing to him. She had been less than nothing to him in 1985, and she was less than nothing to him in this concrete room. And she would be less than nothing to him when he died on a Thursday afternoon in the prison infirmary with no visitors. She had been a thing he had used. That was all. Stone sat with that for a long time. He had thought walking into this room that he would say a lot of things. He had thought he might say something cruel. He had thought he might give a speech. He had thought he might even perhaps do something with his hands. Instead, he reached out and took the photograph back and put it carefully into the inside pocket of his coat. "Mr. Greaves," he said quietly, "you are going to die in a state bed, alone, with nobody, just like she died. The only difference is that she was a child and you are not." He stood up. "That is all I came to say." He walked out of the room. In the hallway, he stopped and he put his hand against the wall and he closed his eyes for 10 full seconds. And when he opened them, something in his chest that had been clenched for 40 years was finally slack. Not gone. It would never be gone. But slack. He walked out into the parking lot of the Federal Building and he got on his bike and he rode the 73 miles back to Cottonwood in the long late summer light. And when he came up the gravel drive of the clubhouse, Junie Mae was waiting on the front step with Raven. And she stood up and she ran across the lot in her small pink shoes and she ran into him at his knees and she said, "You were gone a long time." "I am back," he said. "Where did you go?" "To finish something old." "Did you finish it?" He thought about that for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "I think I did." 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, a small dark sedan came up the long gravel drive of the clubhouse. The driver was a woman in her late 70s with white hair cut short and a cane on the passenger seat beside her. She got out of the car slowly, the way a person gets out of a car when arthritis is the daily weather of her life, and she stood at the gate with a manila envelope held against her chest in both hands. Tank on the gate that morning walked over. "Ma'am," he said, "can I help you?" "I am here to see Wyatt Brennan," she said. "He will not know me. My name is Edith Lattimore. I knew his mama. A long time ago." Tank looked at her for a moment. Then he opened the gate. Stone was at the long table going over a list with Ghost when Tank brought her in. He looked up. He looked at the white-haired woman with the manila envelope. His face did not change, but something behind his eyes did. He stood up. He pulled out a chair for her himself. "Mrs. Lattimore," he said quietly, "I remember you." "You were a boy," she said. "I would not have expected you to. You brought a pie to the house, after Emily." Her eyes filled very fast, the way old people's eyes fill. "I brought several," she said. "I did not know what else to bring." She sat down. She set the manila envelope on the table between them. She did not push it across. She did not pick it up. She just rested both her old hands on top of it. "Your mama gave me this in 1988, she said, a year before she passed. She said she could not look at it anymore. She said she could not throw it away. She made me promise to keep it and to give it to you only if I felt the time was right. I have kept it for 38 years, Wyatt. I am sorry I waited so long. I saw your face on the television last week. I saw the man they put in handcuffs. I knew the time had come. She slid the envelope across. Stone did not move for a long second. Then he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of lined notebook paper, folded twice. The folds were soft with age. The handwriting was the careful, slanting handwriting of an 11-year-old girl who had been good in school. It was dated December 4th, 1986, the day before. Stone read it once. He read it again. The third time he read it, his hand began to shake very small, the way Doc's hand shook when his blood sugar was low. He set the paper down on the table. He did not say anything for a long time. Edith Lattimore did not say anything either. She just sat with her hands folded on the table and waited the way old women who have lived through long things know how to wait. Wyatt, Stone said at last, in a voice that did not sound like his own. He was reading off the page now, but very quietly, almost to himself. I am sorry I cannot be braver. I tried. You were brave for both of us for a long time. I want you to know that. You were always brave, Wyatt. When you are a man, please be brave for someone else who needs it. Do not be sad for me. I love you. Emily. He stopped. He put one hand over his eyes. His shoulders came up and went down very small, exactly the way they had come up and gone down behind the generator shed at the county hospital the day Forge was hurt. Edith Lattimore reached across the table and put her old crooked hand on his other hand and held it there. She knew you tried, son, she said softly. She knew. Stone did not lift his hand from his eyes for a long minute. When he did, he folded the letter very carefully along its old fold lines. He took it across the room to Ghost's desk. He asked Ghost quietly to laminate it the way they had laminated Junie May's first drawing. Ghost did it without a word right there while Stone stood beside him. The little machine hummed. The paper came out in clear plastic sealed against time. Stone walked back to the long table. He sat down across from Edith Lattimore. He picked up his coffee with a hand that was steady again. Mrs. Lattimore, he said, I am going to drive you home, and then I am going to come back tomorrow, and we are going to sit on your porch, if you will have me, and you are going to tell me every single thing you remember about my mama and my sister. Things I was too young to know, things I was too angry to ask about for 40 years. I would like that very much, Wyatt. Yes, ma'am. That afternoon in the small back room of the clubhouse in the drawer of the nightstand, where he kept the photograph of Emily in the yellow Easter dress, Stone laid the laminated letter down beside the photograph, and he closed the drawer, and he stood there in the doorway for a moment, looking at the closed drawer. For the first time in 40 years, what was in that drawer was not only grief. There was also finally a sister's voice telling him she had known. A year passed. It was a year of paperwork and depositions and television cameras Delamarche learned how to keep her face polite for. It was a year of small money returning to her in dribs and drabs, recovered settlements and frozen accounts. It was a year of Della enrolling in a paralegal program at the community college in Flagstaff 3 days a week with Raven driving her up and back. It was a year of Junie May going to second grade in Cottonwood at the small elementary school 3 blocks from the clubhouse, with Doc and Tank trading off picking her up at the gate at 3:25 every weekday afternoon. It was a year of birthday parties and stitches and stuffed animals and pancake batter on Saturday mornings, and of Junie May announcing at 7 3/4 that when she grew up, she was going to be a biker, which got such a particular roar of laughter out of the long table at breakfast that she felt very pleased with herself and decided to repeat it as often as possible. It was a year also of the town of Cottonwood quietly changing its mind. The bakery down on Front Street started leaving a box of pastries on the front step of the clubhouse every Sunday morning. The bakery owner, a widow named Mrs. Yarborough, never spoke to the men of the club about it, and the men of the club never thanked her. It was simply understood. After about 3 months, Forge began leaving an envelope tucked under the empty box every Monday morning with a small note and a $5 tip. After about 6 months, the local Lutheran church started inviting the club to their fall chili cook-off. The men attended in their leather and their patches, and they brought Forge's chili, which won. Sheriff Bo, with his retirement coming up the road, started coming up the long gravel drive on Wednesday evenings for dinner. He brought his wife. His wife brought a green bean casserole. The green bean casserole was eaten every time with the same quiet appreciation as Forge's grilled cheese. On a warm Saturday afternoon in late August, almost exactly 1 year to the day after the long afternoon at the Red Mesa gas station, the club held a barbecue in the yard behind the clubhouse. The whole yard was full, 24 members, the chapter presidents from the north and east and west, Sheriff Bowe and his wife, Bet from the discount store, Mrs. Yarborough from the bakery, Margaret Ainsworth, who had taken a long leave of absence from the bureau and was thinking about not going back, Doc's brother from Tucson, two of the second-grade teachers from Junie May's school, Edith Lattimore sitting in a folding chair in the shade with a glass of lemonade and a small, careful smile watching the children play. About 40 people in all. The smell of mesquite smoke and grilled meat hung over the yard. Junie May, 8 years old, in a yellow sundress with the small leather bracelet still on her wrist, was running across the lawn after a butterfly with 3 other little girls, all of whom were her best friends in the world. Delamarche walked across the lawn with 2 paper plates, one in each hand. She came to stand beside Stone, who was standing by the fence at the back of the property, looking out across the desert at the long blue line of the mountains in the distance. She handed him a plate. "Mr. Brennan," she said. "Mrs. Marsh," he said. They stood there a while side by side, eating brisket off paper plates, watching the kids and the butterflies and the long late summer light on the rocks. "I never thanked you properly," Della said. "You do not have to. I know I do not have to. I want to." She looked down at her plate. "You saved her life," she said. "You saved my life. I want to be clear that I know that." Stone did not answer for a while. "Mrs. Marsh," he said finally, "Della, you and that little girl saved more than you know." He reached into the inside pocket of his vest. He took out a small flat thing folded carefully into a clear plastic sleeve. It was the crayon drawing. A great big man in a black vest and silver ponytail, twice his real size, holding the hand of a small girl in a yellow dress under an enormous yellow sun. The sun was smiling. The man was smiling in a careful crayon way. The girl was smiling. The drawing had been carried every day in the inside pocket of his vest for 12 months. The plastic sleeve had small creases in it now. The edges of the paper inside were soft. "This goes with me everywhere," he said. She looked at the drawing. She looked at him. "You know what she drew last week," Della said softly. "What?" She drew it again. "This time there is 3 people in it. You, her, and another little girl in between you, both holding both your hands." Stone closed his eyes. He stood with his eyes closed for a moment in the warm late afternoon with the smell of mesquite smoke and the sound of children laughing somewhere behind him. "Did she ask you who the other little girl was?" he said. "No," Della said. "I think she knew." When he opened his eyes again, the long line of the mountains had not moved. The sun was easing down toward the west. Junie May had caught a butterfly in her cupped hands and was running over to show Tank, who was leaning on the fence 20 feet away with a paper plate of his own. Stone breathed in. "You know what I think, ma'am," he said. "What?" "I think my sister Emily would have liked your daughter very much." Della Marsh did not say anything to that. She just reached out very gently and laid her hand on the back of his where it rested on the top board of the fence, and she left it there for the count of 3, and then she took it away and she went to find her daughter. The phone in Ghost's pocket buzzed at 6:22 that evening. He pulled it out. He read the screen. His face went still in the particular way that his face went still. He walked over to Stone by the back fence and he held the phone up so Stone could see the screen. It was an alert. A new one from a network the club had built and maintained for almost 3 years now. The network was a quiet thing. The network did not have a website. The network was a phone tree of women who knew other women, of pastors, who knew other pastors, of social workers, and ER nurses and shelter directors across 4 states, and it ended at Ghost's phone. The alert was 3 lines long. Single mother, young son age 4, Albuquerque. Husband returning home this evening from a 6-month deployment. Mother believes she will not survive the night. Stone read the 3 lines. He looked across the yard. The barbecue was still going. The kids were still laughing. The sun was still in the sky. The brisket was not yet finished. There was still half a pitcher of lemonade on the long picnic table. Mrs. Yarborough was telling some story to Doc's brother that was making Doc's brother laugh helplessly. Edith Lattimore was watching the butterfly chase with a soft, far-off look on her face, as if she were seeing through it to some other afternoon a long time ago. Stone breathed in. He turned around and he raised his voice just a little, just enough to carry across the yard. "Brothers," he called. "Sister." The yard went quiet inside of 3 seconds. 24 faces in leather turned toward him. "Albuquerque," he said. "Tonight, mother and a 4-year-old. We need to roll inside the hour." There was no discussion. There never was. Forge set down the tongs and started wrapping plates of food in foil for the road. Doc stood up from where he had been sitting on the cooler and went to get his bag. Wrench walked toward the open garage to check the chase truck. Tank, who had been holding Junie May's captured butterfly in his cupped hands for inspection, opened his hands to let the butterfly go, and then stood up and turned and started toward the building. Raven was already pulling her gloves out of her back pocket. Margaret Ainsworth on the porch set down her plate. She did not say anything. She just nodded once at Stone. Delamarche stood very still by the lemonade table. Her daughter ran up to her breathless, with her cheeks pink, and said, "Mama, are they going to go save somebody else?" "Yes, baby." "Should I tell them to be careful?" "You can tell Mr. Stone if you want, baby." Junie May took off across the yard at a dead run. Stone was walking toward the building. She caught up to him at the edge of the porch and grabbed onto his leg with both arms, the way she had grabbed onto his leg 1 year ago at the Red Mesa gas station. And she looked up at him, and her hair came halfway out of its braids again, and she said the thing she always said, "Be careful." Stone laid his big rough hand on the top of her head. "Always," he said. Inside of 8 minutes, 12 motorcycles were in formation in the gravel drive in front of the clubhouse, idling in a long, low, throaty rumble that ran along the ground and into the soles of 40 people's shoes. The chase truck was loaded. Doc's medical bag was strapped down. Forge had 2 coolers of food in the bed wedged with ropes so they would not shift. The sun was a flat orange thing balanced on the edge of the western hills. Stone sat on his bike at the front of the formation. He pulled the small, clear plastic sleeve out of the inside pocket of his vest. He looked at the crayon drawing one more time. The new one, the one with 3 people in it, was folded carefully behind it now, in its own sleeve, 2 layers of plastic and 1 drawing inside each. And tucked behind both of them was a third laminated thing, a piece of lined notebook paper with the careful slanting handwriting of an 11-year-old girl on it, sealed against time. He tucked all 3 of them back over his heart. Delamarche stood on the porch with one hand on her daughter's shoulder. She did not wave. She just stood there. Stone looked at her. She nodded. He nodded back. He kicked his bike into gear and 12 engines came up to a single deeper roar and the convoy moved. They went out the gate of the clubhouse 2 by 2 and one alone at the front. They turned right on the county road. They picked up speed on the long straightaway toward the interstate. A camera mounted high on the corner of the clubhouse roof caught them as they went. The footage would years later be played at the funeral of one of them, and at the wedding of another, and at the 8th grade graduation of a girl named Junie May Marsh. In the footage, the formation tightens into a clean V as they hit the interstate. The taillights of 12 motorcycles bend slightly to the southeast against the orange sky. On the lead bike taped flat to the handlebars under the speedometer, in a small clear plastic sleeve, a crayon drawing is just barely visible. 2 figures in the drawing. A great big man and a small girl. They are holding hands under a smiling yellow sun. And on the back of the small clear plastic sleeve taped on at the last possible second before the engine started, there is a second small clear plastic sleeve. Inside that one, in a child's careful handwriting in pencil, is a single sentence. "I will be here when you come home." The desert took them in. The sky turned from orange to rose to a deep and dusty violet, and the long V of 12 red taillights rode out into it, and the road ahead of them ran straight as a promise toward a city they did not live in, toward a woman they did not know yet, toward a 4-year-old boy they had never seen. Behind them, in the small lit yard of the clubhouse, a barbecue was being slowly, carefully cleaned up by 5 people who had stayed behind. Sheriff Bowe and his wife, Mrs. Yarborough, Margaret Ainsworth, Edith Lattimore sitting in her folding chair with a clean dish towel folded in her lap, refusing to be useless. They worked in companionable, quiet stacking plates, folding chairs covering the leftover food. The kids who had been chasing butterflies were inside now, watching a movie under a blanket on the long couch. The cicadas were starting up in the dry grass beyond the fence. Delamarche sat on the front step with a cup of coffee in her hands. She looked out across the empty lot, at the open gate, at the dust slowly settling back down where 12 motorcycles had been 5 minutes before. She was not afraid. For the first time in 15 months, sitting alone on a step in the falling dark of a desert evening, with her daughter laughing softly inside the building behind her, and a cup of coffee in her hands, and an empty road in front of her. Della Marsh was not afraid. She lifted her cup very slightly in the direction the bikes had gone. "Be careful," she said quietly to nobody. Out on the highway, far away by now, 12 men and women on 12 machines came up over a low rise, and the world opened in front of them. All desert and dusk, and the first hard stars in the eastern sky. And Wyatt Brennan called Stone, 58 years old, leader of the Sons of Salvation Motorcycle Club, with 2 crayon drawings and 1 old letter taped to his handlebars, and a photograph of a 9-year-old girl in a yellow Easter dress folded in the inside pocket of his vest, leaned a little lower over the tank of his bike, and opened the throttle. The desert took them. They rode on into the dark, chasing a phone call, chasing a monster, chasing the wall that had not been there for them, the wall they had built for everyone else. And up on the wide black sky somewhere west of where they were going, the very first star of the evening came up over the rim of the world and steady held its small bright place. It would be there when they came home.